Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, home of the satirical saltire. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. With me this evening is my co-host. I've got my wingman back. It's JB Whitesnake. All right, John, how's it going, buddy? It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Peter. Hope you're keeping well, pal.
Aye, no bad. A bit better than what I was the other day. I had a bit of toothache the other day when we had Alistair on, and I was trying my best to kind of not get air in and out my mouth. So I was trying not to laugh, but he got me a couple of times. You know how it is, but much better today. Thank you very much. Right, well, here, we've got an absolutely fantastic guest. The guest that we've got today, I had seen on through a Scottish prism. I'd seen some things that she was involved in through the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, and also other things that are recently coming to light as well. That I'd seen our guest, or I'd seen the name being mentioned. So without further ado, our guest for our constitutional chat this evening is Sara Salyers. Hi Sarah, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. I'm sorry about doing a Gordon Ross on you. I've got to do this in my car, so that's okay, guys.
Well, it'll be markedly different for Gordon Ross anyway, because we'll be talking about the Scotland and its independence and its right to do it without an S30, that's for sure. So it's good to have you on, first of all. Tell us a wee bit about yourself, because we like to find out a wee bit about our guests. So, and the best person to find out from is the guest themselves. So, over to you.
Well, let me see. I'm a gran. I've got a 5-year-old grandson. So everything gets a lot more focused when you've got the next generation to think about. That makes a big difference. I live just outside Dunfermline. I was born not far from here. I've spent time abroad. I've worked as a TV producer and writer, but the thing I liked doing best was TV journalism, investigative reporting. And when that got to be impossible, it started to get impossible about 2002. And I just met my late husband then, and it was, do I go to the States or do we try to carry on, this long distance relationship? And it got so difficult really to make proper programs, proper investigative documentaries that I thought I'm going to have to change careers. So I moved to the States and I ended up teaching remedial students in college. And I was told when I started, these are not really college students. They didn't do well in high school. They're not really college material. And just something in me thought, you know what, that's just a story. But I walked into my classroom, and it was so different from anything I'd ever done before. That whole kind of environment and everything. And they were so angry and so kind of resentful. And I was doing this thing, it's called action research, where you just survey your own teaching and what's happening. So I thought, I went, okay, I'm going to do it on why they're not even wanting to be here, because they were meant to be learning. I was teaching English and they were meant to be learning English. And you know how it's taught, it's proper English. You're there to learn proper English. Anyway. And I suddenly got, I'm standing there, I'm in a mostly black classroom. I'm white, I'm middle-aged, I'm middle class as far as they're concerned, and I'm there to tell them how to speak. Like they don't speak like me, I don't speak like them. And I thought about it, and the next week I went back into my class and I said, right, yes, tatty bogles, pin your lugs back, because I'm no blethering here for my own benefit. Do you all get that? See, this is what you hear where I come from. Nothing wrong with it. And then I asked them if they wanted me to translate, and everything changed from them. Then it was just, we're going to learn a sort of common language, and there's nothing wrong with the way any of us speak, and everything changed. And I think a lot of how I began to review what's happened to Scotland, because I've been I was a SNP from 40 years ago, and pro-ND, and long before I went to the States. But being married to a Cherokee and being in that kind of foreign environment, I began to see how similar what's happened to us is to what's happened to the Native Americans. It's amazing, just incredible, and our sort of immediate friends in the circle we moved in was mostly Native American. And I'd have these amazing conversations about treaty and treaty law. And I think that's kind of what started this whole process. But by the time I got back and I saw what happened in the referendum, I wasn't entitled to vote at that point, as I hadn't been back long enough to do that. But I was there to look into what happened and just how I don't know what to call it. It's a cheat. The referendum was a cheat, and so I just sort of brought all that to kind of looking at this, and then started working with the SSRG about a year ago, working with doing a lot of talking with a journalist called Laurie Flynn. We started, and it just kind of developed from there. And I still remember realizing what had always been there in front of us, and we'd just never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what it's like? It was like, and I've had so many people say they've had the same reaction. They've had hair standing up on the back of their arms, and they've never gone down since they've realized. It's like you've been staring at a field where, like a bogle in it, and you keep staring, and then suddenly it moves, and you realize you've been staring at a person all along. It wasn't what you thought it was. Mm-hmm. So it's like that. Anyway, I've gone on way too long. That's
No. Listen, it's fascinating to hear, John. I seen your eyes raising up a wee bit there when Sarah was mentioning that she was married to a Cherokee.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But a million questions I'd love to ask you about that alone. Never mind anything else.
Do you want me to? Right, cool. Right, well.
No, I'll happily talk away. Tell me about the tribal system, and a synopsis of it to your understanding of what it's like to be a Cherokee in America today, or what they're expected to be.
That's just a really, really sad story. But my husband he had 4 years in Scotland before he died. He absolutely loved it here. And the thing that he was fascinated by was all the contacts, the connections between Native Americans, particularly Cherokee and the Scots. It's an absolutely amazing story. I could sit here and tell you all about it all night. I mean, what I learned from him. And then he started studying Scottish history and this parallels. And it goes back to what it's the same for them as for us. They've completely disenfranchised. They're fighting very hard to survive as a people and as a nation, and they're facing the most horrific injustices, and the funny thing is you look at what's been done, you think they did that to us. They did that to us, and there's such a connection. There's a place up in North Carolina called Koala Boundary, and that's the kind of one of the old heartlands of the Cherokee before there's the Oklahoma Cherokee. That's where they were removed to, and Koala Boundary is still in their original homeland, and it's tiny, but where they used to have this huge range, but that's still there. And the number of Scots, and I'll tell you the weirdest thing. I mean, talk about something that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. My husband, like me, he was doing PhD. He was nearly finished with it. I wasn't, but he'd done a lot of digging into, history. I mean, the stuff he knew. So he decided to dig into my ancestry. Turns out that the chief of the Cherokee at the time of the removal was a guy called John Ross, and he's my great something uncle. There's just so much we don't know about that connection, that relationship. But it meant that when I came back and I started looking at this again, I was coming at it from the viewpoint of constitution and treaty law. So it might be that's why I saw what I saw.
Yeah, it seems like it's the very same as parallels there you can raise with Scotland and like the people at Cherokee Indians and others, that our history has been erased and homogenised and basically changed to suit a British point of view, and it's basically non-existent in schools practically in a lot of cases. Can I remember one of the subjects I loved at history? I loved modern studies and history, and it basically touched upon, and that was it. They're more interested in telling you about Oliver Cromwell and all that, and They didn't want to touch Scottish history, and how it's been obliterated, and even the things that the British have done colonially. That's all been wiped to the history books as well. It's all been sanitized to make it acceptable. Yeah, just to make it acceptable what we've got today. Everything we've got today is related to that and from that, and you can't get away from that. But a fascinating thing I've said to someone else before is, having watched it, you watch Sky Television or satellite television, you could spend 15 hours a day watching history about the Second World War and about Germany and about Hitler and the atrocities and everything else. And all these channels, they show the same pictures and movies and documentaries. Yeah, and you could spend 15 hours, and yet you couldn't find one programme about what the British done in India. You've got to go and look for information, and it's in the most obscure places. So it's been totally sanitised to wipe away the barbarism, and also it happened to Indian people as well. They were slaughtered and massacred, land stolen off them, and they've basically been treated as a second-class race, if not worse. And there's a lot of parallels to become from that. And they want to dumb down people to make them think, well, you don't have that. That didn't exist. You come from something that we tell you come from, not where you came from yourself. So it's fascinating to hear that. Fascinating. Peter, on you go.
Well, listen, Sarah had mentioned a couple of times that making the hairs on your arms standing up, on your neck, whatever it might be. Now, you were at the Alba conference last Saturday. Well, no, Saturday there, Saturday past. On the 26th, I think it was, March. And you went up to address the conference at one point. Now, I want to get how you were feeling before you went up, because I'm going to play you speaking at conference. I know you may have seen it numerous occasions. I know I have. I've had to try and toughen myself up to it, because there's a certain part that it gets to each time when the eyes start welling up and I start getting my wee heart going, oh, right, because it happens. So I've been trying to toughen myself up all week watching this video, right? But I would like to get your thoughts on how you were feeling before you approached to make the speech.
Well, what had happened was that we put in a motion for that conference that we didn't hear about. It didn't make it in. But we were really concerned because there's a plan to put together and support. I completely support this, but there's a plan to put together a convention of elected representatives. And what we've been working on is to look for a route to Indy, which I think is a great idea. But we've been working really hard on excavating this constitution and how this worked, and how the danger we're in at the moment is that we have a written constitution in Scotland, and it's kind of been bypassed. It hasn't been, almost like it hasn't been noticed. It's turned into, like I said, like the scarecrow in the field that you didn't realize is a person. And what that constitution does is it gives us in Scotland the mechanism, the power to stop a lot of the criminal, corrupt stuff that Westminster's doing, which Holyrood can't stop, the Westminster MPs can't stop. But if we reclaim the constitution that we're supposed to have, it's government is limited by the people according to that constitution. So and you've got this right to redress, and we're so kind of, please don't miss out on this. Don't ignore it. This is a route. There's so much to say about it. And all we were asking was acknowledgement that is the case in Scotland, that constitutionally Parliament's not sovereign over the people are sovereign over their Parliament. And we can prove it so many ways. So it's like, what do we do? And one person who'd come with me, he was just so upset. He said, I'm going. And I said, no, don't. We'll do something. And I thought, right, I don't want to oppose the motion because it's a really good motion. We'll do a remit back. That's what we'll do. We'll do a remit back, and that will give me a chance to say to the whole conference, this is what's missing. And I really didn't know what I was going to say, but I was just so, this is so important. You need to know this. You don't miss this. This is huge. So that's what I was thinking and feeling when I got up there.
Well, what we'll do is we'll play the clip. I'm going to stop it at the part where it usually catches me, just to kind of go, this is the part that usually catches me, right? Just so that we can add a wee bit of effect, because it's it's one of those things that I've described it to people that I was glad that I was in the room as you spoke to witness that speech. It was one of those I was glad to be there moments. I was glad to be in that room when that was getting said. So
so was I. Let me tell you that I know how it affected me, and I've been talking for close to a year with really dear friends about this who were affected the same way, saying I think this is what will get people up from the sense of hopelessness and helplessness, that what can we do? There's nothing we can do. We've been so, with all the rubbish, the stuff that has happened with the referendum, with what happened with the SNP, and, you have to come with something. And I said, this is it. This is because it changes how I feel. And when the conference reacted that way, and what got me was I was looking forward, and I could see guys with tears coming down, and then I couldn't. And and then it was like it's the same for all of us.
Aye.
It was an amazing moment.
Aye, it was. Right, so let's get to it, because it was an amazing moment. Let's do a wee share, and no doubt everybody will have seen this by now. So, but here it is.
What it was for. From Sara Salyers for a remit back in relation to this motion. So I'm going to invite Sara Salyers to the stage. Can I ask Sara, she makes her way up here, if she has a seconder for the remit back, which would be required for it to be heard. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, everybody, and what a pleasure to be with my indie family and know this is real family. This is a great motion, and the remit back is for one reason and one reason only. It's not complete. It's not complete because it doesn't include a movement that has got going very quickly and is getting off the ground faster than we can keep up with it, which has to do with putting the power back in the hands of Scotland's people. It has to do with excavating Scotland's written constitution. There is a phrase, the unwritten constitution of the UK, and actually that is inaccurate, and many legal scholars will say it's inaccurate. We have a written constitution. It's just that it's written in all kinds of different documents. So what we've got is an uncodified document. But if you go and look up UK Unwritten Constitution, here's what you're going to find. You might find yourself up on the page of the British Library, which has a wonderful article about where the Constitution exists, and it'll take you through Magna Carta, the Declaration of Parliament, the Bill of Rights, and then on to the present, without a single mention of Scotland having any constitutional documents. So what happened? How did the pre-Union English Constitution suddenly become the post-Union Scottish Constitution? How did we all become English and bound by conventions, which, by the way, people will say in terms of Scottish excavation of the Constitution, my goodness, that's ancient history, isn't it? I mean, why are you bothering with that? Let's deal with today's realities. Today's realities include something called Parliamentary Sovereignty, which says that Parliament is sovereign over the people, and 1 million people on the streets don't have as much influence as a corporate lobbyist. It's up to Parliament. That's Parliamentary Sovereignty. High Court ruled in 2016 that there was no requirement for Parliament, for the judges to listen to the electorate. Do you know Scotland had a very different system? And our ancestors, when they signed that forced marriage contract, and it was a contract, they put in a prenup. They did. They put in a get out clause. The get out was, and this was done, whatever you think of the Presbyterian Kirk, and I have Presbyterian ancestors going all the way back, they were worried that Scotland would lose her character, her judicial character, her religious character, and her constitutional character. So they made it a condition of the Union and the treaty that that constitution was upheld. Now, we've been excavating that constitution, and in very short terms, what it says is, it is a crime in Scotland to claim that a parliament is sovereign over the people. It is a crime punishable by forfeiture of power. It is a crime to attack human rights. It is a crime to attack the right to protest in Scotland. It is a crime to give money to your pals. It is without parliamentary oversight. It is a crime to use the law to go after your political enemies. So some of us, you may know about the SSRG and Albafest and Salvo, some of us are excavating those rights, because when you get married, if you have a prenup and the other partner breaks the conditions of that contract, you've got a way out. And it's not a coincidence that we've been being told that our way out is get a majority of MPs in Westminster. Oh, no, it's not. Prove that most people, including those who are only passing through, want it. Oh, no, it's not. Because the map that the prison governors will give us to get out, the map that the abuser in the marriage will give you to get out, is gaslighting. We have a way out. And that way out is to get the people of Scotland together, back up off their knees after the treachery and the betrayal and the centuries of abuse we have suffered, and explain you are sovereign in Scotland. You lend your power to any government and you can take it back, not by saying, oh, well, we'll vote in another party. You can sack them and you can replace them. So we are asking Conference to send this wonderful motion back, and I wish we weren't, to include the acknowledgement that power in Scotland is vested in the people, and that we need to support the movement that is looking to create that grassroots tidal wave that says to the whole of Scotland and the whole of the world and the international courts, this is our law. This is the crime that's been committed against us, and we will, thank you very much, be reconvening the Assembly of the People that was known as the Convention of the Estates, putting this government on trial, and when they are found guilty, sacking them. So please.
Right, so I'm just letting you know, it was just this wee next bit here that all week that kept on capturing me. I know that you'd said you'd seen men with tears running down their face, Sarah. I was one of them, but I was away at the back of the crowd, so you wouldn't have seen me. But I was standing up at the back of the auditorium, cheering, absolutely cheering at this part here, and then it just got too much for Hero Run. Right, here we go.
I feel the same way about my country, and I feel the same way about you guys. So I'm asking Conference to remit back this wonderful motion and have it include support for the movement to reclaim Scotland's written constitution. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Right, we'll stop that there. So I've been training, I've been putting myself in training all week for this, just so that I could get through it and look as if I'm smiling. I think I'm managing all right now. Watching that back, have you watched it back?
I have, but only once. It's a very hard thing to watch yourself.
Well, if it's any reassurance, it's been a very delightful thing for me to have been watching you all week, absolutely every time. And the same feeling as when you were walking back up the aisle after you had spoken, and I stepped into the aisle and I gave you a hug and pretty much followed you, without stalking you, followed you down to the canteen to try and talk to you a wee bit more. See, John and I, we started this podcast just over a year ago, and on the 29th of March, we were going to be talking about the claim of rights. This is some behind the scenes information. On that show, I didn't get the camera right, so you couldn't see me, and I ended up losing my place, and I never spoke about half the things that we were supposed to speak about on that episode, right? But it was like I'd said to you when I'd spoke to you in the cafe at the conference. You look at things, people give you wee threads, and you go and you'll look at certain pieces of information. I know I'm no qualified. I'm just a guy at the other end of a screen that takes an interest in his country, and I look at things, and I've sat in a few things that the likes of Robin McAlpine and a lot of other names have put forward their offerings, and I try and listen to things to hear what they're talking about, and then try and do a wee bit of investigating work for just to pass my own time. But I knew that the claim of rights was something, that there was something there. But as I say, I'm not the person to go, oh, here you go, this is what it is. I just knew that there was something there. So to hear you and speaking so passionately about it, I need to get Sarah, we need to speak here, we need to do whatever we can to bring this to the attention of as many people as possible, because to be fair, this is Scotland's way out. This is Scotland's way out, if you ask me.
It really is.
What's your thoughts?
Well, the thing about this is, I was at Arbroath yesterday, and Mike Russell was speaking, and I was actually very pleased with a lot of what he was saying. I was really pleased to hear him talking about, the kind of government that comes from the people out and not the top down, which is absolutely what the 1689 Claim of Right is about. And I think it's in the wind now. This has been there all along. What somehow got missed, I'm not sure, to be honest. I remember in 2014, Alex Salmond saying it's up to the people now. And I thought, what exactly does he mean? I mean, we've just had this huge referendum, all these people voted, but what is he talking? So that kind of got me going and looking until I came back and I looked at this. And the short of this is that when they needed to depose in Scotland, they needed to get rid of James VII and II and replace him with William. And they had this convention. I'll talk a wee bit about the way democracy was structured in Scotland in 1689. But I'll tell you now, when you go into it, you discover we had a better level of what you could call participatory democracy back then than we have today. Anyway, so they, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've learned more about my own history in the last year than I had in the rest of my life. So they had this convention, and they had, as usual, so there was the Parliament, which is the three estates. Then there was the Convention of the Estates. That just means the Assembly of the Communities. And that kind of represented, in Scotland, the Parliament always borrowed power. And it was the people, the nation, that lent it. So in the Scottish way of thinking, you couldn't have the people that were borrowing the power also being the ones that were in charge of how, that they can't be the same. So you had elections from all across the boroughs in Scotland, and you had, all the sort of the basic that were felt to be the communities at the time. So there'd be some MPs there, and there'd be, Lords of the Articles and nobility and ministers, but they, as they say in the Claim of Right, they represented what they called a full and free expression of the nation. So not the government that was carrying out the policy, but the nation. And the two of them were sister organizations. And they had a completely different development. The Parliament developed out of the King's Council, I think, kind of way back. But the Convention of the Estates seems to have developed probably from the Guardians of the Realm. Then they became the General Council, or Greater Council, I can never remember that one. And then they changed the name to the Convention of the Estates. And they were changing and moving, it was everything develops, nothing stays the same. The interesting thing about the Claim of Right was that when it came to do this, it had all these grievances, these things that the King and his government had done. And so what they said, and it's very similar to the Bill of Rights, but they said one really and very, very important thing, that what he had done was invade Scotland's fundamental constitution. That just means violate Scotland's fundamental constitution. They weren't making up a constitution. They weren't saying we're saying this is they were fighting an existing constitution which had the provision that government or monarchy, because in that day the government was the monarch and the parliament, was legally limited. It couldn't strike down any law that it wanted. It couldn't get rid of civil rights and liberties. To do that was, as they put it, to invert, to turn on its head what the aims of government, what government's really about. It didn't, and there was the right of redress for that. Really interesting, just to give you context, from 1592, Scotland's Parliament officially acknowledged the sovereignty of the people by offering something called salvo. At the end of every parliamentary session, 1592, right? End of every parliamentary session, they offered salvo. That's from a Latin phrase, which is salvo jure cuius libet, saving the rights of anyone. And what that meant was that anyone or any group of people could come to the parliament, and when it was offered, stand up and say, that statute or that act you've just passed, or that regulation of whatever, that violates my rights, or it violates this group of people's rights under Scottish law. And if they did that, the Parliament had to refer it. It would go to a committee, or it would go to the Court of Session. So can you imagine today?
You'd never get Parliament finished in a day. If it was...
But that's what was offered. And in 1663, that was made into an act. It became a law and under a statute in Scotland. And that absolutely shows that it was the people answering to the Parliament answering to the people, and not the people to the Parliament. Why that is important is that under English law, in the English Constitution, the Parliament could make the Constitution or change the Constitution. What the claim of right is saying is, we have a Constitution, and no monarch or his government has the right to touch it. And if he does, and then they list the ways, right? If he does, or if they do, the penalty is that he forfeited the throne. That is, you forfeit power. You cannot do that. The Constitution exists, and you get lent power by the people. You break the compact, the Constitution, and you're out. Now that I'll come back to why that's exciting, because you wouldn't believe how many really, really up-to-date, really controversial things that we're dealing with today. The claim of right deals with. It's absolutely amazing. And it's like, you're out, you've done this. So the English Parliament has the right to change the English Constitution. The Scottish Parliament, or the English Parliament, does not. I mean, the Scottish Parliament didn't, neither did the English, that's for sure. So that Constitution, so right, I know. So they don't, we have a document, right? And this document says Scotland has a Constitution. This is and it's quite short. We can look back and we can say, yep, we can see that. We can see this is a development, and it's very clearly still there in 1689. And we can go back to the Declaration of Barbara. There is the declaration of the clergy at the same time, which is amazing, because that talks about the ordinary people. We can see this 1450. We can see how the boroughs came in and got. So the important thing about this is this other body, the Convention of the Estates, is not the Parliament. When Scotland signed the Treaty of Union, signed up to that, the Parliament was dissolved. So was the English Parliament. But the English body wasn't really aware of this. They couldn't take on board this notion, couldn't get their heads around this notion that the power wasn't vested in the Parliament. For them, it's the king at the top of the pyramid, and then the Parliament takes that power, and then they've got the king's power, and the king is kind of, next to God. The divine right of kings never came from Scotland, no matter what they tell you. We had this notion, and ours comes from the Dukas. Ours comes, and that's what we have in common with the Native Americans, the kinship system, where, so everyone has a say. And in Scotland, the king was the first among equals. When Charles I came up to Scotland, apparently he was absolutely horrified because he went to the Parliament and people didn't take the hats off. He was used to people kneeling.
Aye, good luck getting Scottish
Because,
people to do that.
because he was first among equals. And that was the same with we'll put him on the midden if he doesn't keep his oath, that whole idea. That's completely foreign. And so the notion that there was a body and a collection of bodies and a whole infrastructure that maintained this accountability, we call it accountability today, and that could stop them and could go into Parliament and say, I'm claiming salvo, or tell Parliament through the Borough Convention, these layers are not to keep the taxes, to give back what's supposed to come back to the common good. I mean, that's really powerful interaction between the people and the various bodies that represent the people and the Parliament. The Convention of the Estates was not dissolved. It couldn't be dissolved as long as the claim of right was not dissolved, because that's the mechanism, right? Right. So go and look at the Acts of Ratification. They call them Acts of Union. Those are the acts that ratify the treaty. And look at the beginning of it. The condition of the treaty and the union is that the 1706 Scottish Act for the preservation of the Presbyterian faith has to be upheld, inserted, respected, ratified along with the articles. It's not an article, it's to be ratified along with any articles, is what it says, which means it's ratified by both parliaments. And when you read that act, it says especially the claim of right. What that means is that the Parliament of England and the Parliament of Scotland, before, as they ratified the treaty and dissolved themselves, they also ratified that in Scotland, her constitution continued. Now, there's just a wee bit that needs explained here. The Constitution, the claim of rights, like the Bill of Rights, by the way, is full of stuff about papists and Catholics and blah, sectarian stuff, which is we wouldn't want to see today, but what was going on at the time. But every constitutional document has got two parts. It's got the legal principle that it's basing its action on, and its action. So it's no more relevant to that the stuff about Catholics is no more relevant than deposing the king. If we bring back the claim of right, it doesn't mean we have to depose James VII all over again, because that was 1689. But the principles, just like Magna Carta, nobody talks about the fact that Magna Carta is anti-Semitic. Magna Carta's got a clause in it that says if you owe money to a Jew and you die, your estate doesn't have to pay it. It's horrible. And then it's got all the wee bits for the barons and the nobles and but we don't throw Magna Carta out because of all that. The Bill of Rights says you can't have a Catholic MP, but my gosh, it's used every day in Parliament. Parliamentary sovereignty comes from that. The whole and parliamentary privilege that they use every day comes from the Bill of Rights. That was the bill passed in England in 1689. The claim of right says Scotland has a fundamental constitution. They don't have a single document that says England has a fundamental constitution. Not one, let alone one that says the principles that we are using to depose this monarch are that government is limited in Scotland, that you cannot set aside laws, you cannot act against the interests of the people, that we have a right of redress, and it's they're embedded in that whole tradition that we can look at. And when they ratified it, Daniel Defoe recorded, and he was a spy and a friend of William, and he was not a fan of Scots in Scotland, but he's kind of journaling it, and he's trying to sort of calm people down. He says, well, the Scots, they don't have anything to complain about because, after the Union, the conditions of government will continue continue under the claim of right, that is, as to the limits of government and obedience. It was well understood that Scotland expected that constitutional position to continue. Now, even a colony that got a constitution got to have that upheld. All the British protectorates, the Commonwealth countries that had constitutions passed, they've been upheld. And I think it's called the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, I think, is the one that looks at these. And there's no question there that the terms of a constitution for these former colonies or whatever have to be upheld. We're not supposed to be a colony, and we can't have ours upheld. And yet legally, there it is. Right now, you transfer that today. If they can have their Bill of Rights, we have ours.
Yeah.
And that changes everything. Everything. We come back and we can say, okay, do you know what you can't do in Scotland under the claim of right? You can't, for example, use the law to go after your political enemies.
Yeah,
That is unlawful.
But that today, actually, we'll come back to that in a wee while. But
you may not do that under Scotland's constitution. That is a crime. It's a crime that is part of, overall, you can forfeit your right to be in power if you do things, that kind of thing. You can't give money to people. You can't give people contracts or money or these COVID contracts or whatever. You can't give people money without oversight. It's specific about that. You can't go after people's data because the claim of right says you're not entitled to know what people think. They don't have to tell you what they think. You can't. You can't limit the right to protest. You can't prevent people.
I notice all these things are things that have happened with the current Scottish government, and it'd be interesting if they know about the claim of rights. Right, John asked it.
Well, they're just as much bound by this, as Westminster. Government is bound by certain conditions in Scotland, and it's wonderful to look how you can trace it back from the time of the Declaration of Arbroath all the way through all these, and how it developed. And we weren't allowed to know that, And what that brings me to is this: that I think it's time for us to recognise that there are two kind of impulses towards independence, and one of those is the impulse of the people who have, like Professor Albert says, have been, whether they're lawfully, what you call a colony or not, they have been colonized. As you were saying earlier, that they've had their history erased. They've had their principles, where that comes from. One of the reasons we know nothing about the Duchess, that system, the Gallic and actually probably Pictish system, which is based on the kinship and that sort of reciprocal obligation thing, is because the Westminster government, after the Jacobite risings, set about deliberately destroying what John Hume called the bonds of affection that held the Highland clans together. It was a shame, but it had to be done. These intense bonds of affection had to be destroyed. They destroyed that. They sent our records away to America. Ancient historical documents. I found out about that at the School of History Studies. They buried they got rid of every bit of that law which had informed the development of Scotland for all that time. And these days, the only thing that you know about the clans and the Highlands is that it's kilts and haggis
Mm-hmm.
and romantic music and Outlander.
Aye.
We get our notion of a man's a man for all that, first among equals, reciprocal rights, power lent by the people, right of redress.
Mm-hmm.
All of that comes from that, the thousands of years that was in place in across Scotland. And it was, whether it was Picts, who, as we know from the life of Columba, had the same setup, or the Scots, who were both in Scotland and Ireland, or the Welsh Celts.
Mm-hmm.
They all had that same, just like that same principle, which is interesting because so do the Native Americans, so do the Aboriginal Australians, so do, and all those people have been disinherited. And in all those people where they have lost that sense of where they come from and who they are, you will find exact same things. You will find alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
You will find substance abuse. You will find high levels of depression and mental illness. You will find social problems and this kind of fracturing,
Mm-hmm.
because you have a way of seeing the world, but you don't know why. You have a way of understanding things, and you don't know where it comes from.
Exactly.
And they call it, what do they call it? Trauma, cultural trauma.
Cultural trauma.
I think they call it cultural trauma, or it might just be what I call it, but and you see it the same. You remember what Ireland was like before it got its independence. You look at that and you see the same problems that we've had in Scotland, right? Norway, the same.
Mm-hmm.
You find the same thing on the reservations in the USA.
It's,
you see the same.
I was just going to say, Sarah, it's fascinating the parallels you can draw between certain types of people. Freedom fighters is the best way to look at it, who are having their freedoms denied, and it's, as you say, all of the knock-on effects that come for their alcoholism, substance abuse, and it's been deprived of your culture, of who you know that your people are. John had a couple of good really questions just when it had the wee crash. John, over to you. On you go, mate, about your questions about how do we...
So what I was going to ask Sarah is, Sarah, how do we go about getting this into some sort of form of document, for want of a better, some sort of form of information that a layman could understand that is usable and understandable? What do we need? A crack team of 100 constitutional lawyers?
I was just going to say, on the SSRG website, I've done a booklet. It's 36 pages, but it's long, but it's an easy read. And most of everything that I've talked about is in that, just laid out very simply. What I think is that the bigger, and it's free, so that should appeal.
Yeah.
And you can always get in touch with me through the SSRG website. And my colleagues and I are, with our colleagues, I don't know what to call it, people that are working on this with me. If people want to get in touch, you can DM me on Twitter, or you can get in touch through the SSRG. If you want to set up like a wee town hall meeting or a wee workshop, or we'll come and do that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just work out dates and we'll do that. And so what we want is for people to learn this. What's difficult about it is it's such a different way of thinking, and realizing that our history is not what we've been told, and that we actually had this. We actually had a more participatory democracy 300 years ago than we've got today. That is really something, isn't that?
Right,
Really?
It's mind-blowing. It makes you go, what's happened in all of these years that were in a worse position than 100 years ago?
It does two things. I just want to say it does two things. For those of us who've had this cultural trauma or colonization, that's healing. That's healing, that we move back and we take back who we are. And it happens in two stages. So we get our constitution, and the next step, as you'll see from the Treaty Bites Back, is once we have that constitution in place, well, then we air those grievances we hear. We have those hearings on the ways in which the law has been broken in Scotland, with the penalty at the end of it. What is good about that is there are a lot of people in Scotland that don't have our cultural trauma. They don't have that feeling. They don't well up at the sound of Flower of Scotland. Why would they? They've come from all over. We've got people who were Jewish refugees from the Nazis, and they bring their, they've got theirs. Thanks, they don't need ours. We've got Polish communities, we've got Italian, we've got Asian, and from India, from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from China. We've got all over. We've got and they're Scots too, and there's they're just as much Scots. They just don't have that need to heal and that history that propels them to want to see what we want to see in that way. But what they do want to see is a country their children can grow up in that is not oppressive and being strangled to death, that where we don't have corrupt. So for them, we don't need to convince people to get behind the banners of the Bruce or whatever. That's not their thing. We need to convince them we've got a really old blueprint that can be modernized under the principles of our Constitution. We've got something that puts our Constitution down, makes it a written Constitution, and that England does not have that. And they guaranteed it would continue in Scotland. We put it back, we get that back in place, and we guarantee we've got citizens' assemblies.
Yep.
We've got the right to go back. The boroughs are the ones that would have gone to the Scottish government and said, you don't get to decide what's happening to all this money that's coming off our offshore energy. Excuse me. They did that once, in the past. No, you don't get to do that. That comes back to the people.
Yep.
You don't get, you can't hold them to account if you've got a media that lies all the time. So great, now you have the rules for the media. You have to tell the truth. Wouldn't that be great? It's really modern. It's old and it's modern, and it would be so easy.
That's for sure. It would be new if they told the truth. That's for sure.
So that's the other part about it, is that I think it's got this to offer everybody: healing for Indigenous Scots, hope in the future for all of us, all our communities, and in such a radical way, and if we can all get behind it, healing for the indie movement too, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And listen, I love the Yes movement, and it's been hard with everything that's been happening to see people that have marched together and chatted about their desire for Scotland to be independent, to not even speak to one another anymore. That's been the most difficult thing as a yeser. I never had any political affiliation before. It was always the case that I was yes, independent minded. And I don't know, I always thought I would remain that way throughout my life. But the scales tipped a wee bit a couple of weeks ago when the First Minister mentioned about keeping an open mind to the no-fly zone. But I've always been Bairns, not bombs. I'm a lover, not a fighter, so to speak. And it's always been peace and friendship. So for when Nicola Sturgeon said that about keeping an open mind about the no-fly zone, there was nothing else I could do. I had no other way registering my disapproval with that other than joining a political party. And I joined the Alba Party. They stand for independence, they stand for women, they stand for kids, they stand for anti-poverty. I fell for Alba because Alba stands for Scotland. There you go, cheesy and corny if you like. There you go, that's what's happened to me. But going forward, Sarah, I want to be able to try and offer a wee bit of a platform going forward. We're looking at doing some live streaming, and I think it'd be a really good idea if we could get the likes of yourself, Professor Alf Baird, and maybe other English constitutional experts to form a wee panel, and we could have a live stream that just goes out to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and gets questions from everybody so that we can reach as many people as possible, and get this. It's already moving like a juggernaut, but so that we can so that we can ensure that we've got a wee bit of extra weight applied to the back, so the juggernaut becomes unstoppable. But you've got my support, and anything that I can do at Tweet Street to try and to support these further, whether it be putting panels on, whether it be putting adverts up in any podcast that I'm doing, just let me know. I've always championed SSRG. I liked how thorough they were when they first launched their information booklet and the manifesto that they put out. Really thorough, and again, some people will go, "You enjoyed reading that?" Well, I enjoy reading these kind of things. It's like, right, okay, what is the small print that nobody else is reading? I'm going to read that because I want to know why it's so small, right? That's the kind of a thing that I do, right? I'm not a professional, but just read it.
Yeah, that's it. Because it's the small print in the treaty of the Acts of Union that really tells us, oh, you ratified our constitution as a condition, did you? Right. No condition, no union. So, that's where the small print comes in really handy.
That's the skullduggery and the even at that point, try to keep us under their boot. At that point, just writing it in. Again, it goes to the point. It used to be the case if you couldn't read, you were always getting conned. Now you need to be able to read, understand the small print, understand the formation of words in a sentence and how it comes out. It's like a formula, it's a mathematical formula in some cases. And you need to be really, really on your game, like Sarah, to kind of be able to identify what these things are and how they work to our advantage, as well as to our detriment. Because, as Sarah says, the small print back, even in the Constitution back then, the treaty back then, lets us know exactly what they were trying to con us out of. But going forward, we'll offer a platform to try and get the message out, to try and get as much support as possible, and hopefully get the people of Scotland talking and have that debate amongst the Scottish people. When I say Scottish people, I don't mean Scottish people like me. I mean anybody who feels Scottish, lives within the boundaries of Scotland and claims themselves to be Scottish. So I would love to get some sort of people's forum going and getting an actual debate about it, and something that we can take and go, well, yous wouldn't do it, so we did, and here's what we've come up with, and well, use is your chance, now it's your turn. Because and
make it really clear, this doesn't belong to parties, it doesn't belong to just one community or one movement. It belongs to every Scot, every single one of us. And that's back to the DERF theme. That's back to the kin system.
Yep. The spirit. Right. I'm welling up again here, right? I'm not doing this. Right. So I'm going to say, Sarah, over to you to say good night for this evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. Oh, it's been a pleasure. John, over to you, mate.
Yeah, Peter, good speaking to you, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, you've given us some very valuable information, which could be very, very handy to us. So we'd like to keep in touch here and keep pushing for it. So you've got a lot of friends here, Sarah. I can assure you that want the same thing as you. And we've got big gobs. So please keep
in touch. Yeah, let's keep in touch. We can do this together.
Please. The more the merrier in this case, the more the merrier. Right, so it's for Tweet Street Scotland Occupied, for Sara Salyers, for JB Whitesnake, for the satirical Saltire, Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. It's good night for now, and we'll catch you soon with some more exciting offerings, hopefully.